Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of the Zone7 podcast. This is Tal Brown, CEO of Zone7, and I've got with me two distinguished guests. We've got Mike Blasquez, who is the Director of Athletic Performance at the University of California, and with us is Joe Clubb, Sports Science Consultant.
Thanks, Tal.
How you doing, Tal? Thanks for having me.
Hey, guys. Thanks so much for being on this with us and sharing your views with the community.
Looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. So today's discussion will be led by Joe Clubb. Please take the spot.
Thank you, Tal. So the goal really is to get through about application of AI and Zone7 in the applied setting. And Mike's going to give us, I'm sure, a fantastic insight into how they're using it at Cal. But before we get into that, Mike, I want to go back almost before this and wonder if you can give us an overview of your structure, your staffing, and also your previous approaches to sports science, load management prior to any kind of AI tools.
Absolutely. Thanks, Joe and Tal. Yeah, shoot. Wow, where to start with that? Probably with just staffing. And I think staffing is critically important, particularly as we start using data and best practice in using data. It's in the football space is relatively new, and having the right people in place that allow you to use that data and find best practice with it and actually apply the use of it is critical. And many places we see folks that are using tech and they're collecting data, but they're not really using it. And so I really believe that having the right people for that are critical. And I'm very fortunate. I wear several hats here at Cal, but as an administrator and oversight of this unit, having some great people have just been the key. And starting with Brian Johnson. Brian Johnson's our head of football athletic performance. Brian's just got this incredible experience of one being a player and having experience in and around football. He played at LSU. He played in the NFL. And then transitioned into a performance coach and he coached, in high level colleges and continues to coach in college, but he's also coached in the NFL. And he's also had a history of having some injury and working through injury and ultimately injury leading to him moving out of playing and into coaching. And his knowledge and understanding and use of data in the football space is phenomenal. And I'll tell you what makes him so unique is that he uses that background and his ability to communicate to sport coaches and actually implement change, globally, individually, in a position setting is just, it's like no one I've ever seen before. And then the other guy that's on our staff that's just been invaluable is Zach Higginbotham, and Zach is new to us. He's been here for a year. He is a scientist. He's really brought a whole new level of sports science to our athletic program, and really kind of the first person we've had on staff with that experience and knowledge and background. And and again, he's got a unique experience too, and he's a practitioner. He's a strength and conditioning coach. He works with our athletes. He's got a really extensive background in the reconditioning space, and his ability to apply the science and apply the data within that spectrum is just like nothing I've ever seen before. So, having like-minded people is the start, and then the use of the data. I mean, actually using it to make decisions is really what makes it all happen in American football, where it's again relatively new. And I think the second part of that question is interesting because early on we were early adopters of some of the technology. I think it was 2011. We initiated our first contract with the Catapult system, and it was interesting going back to that time, everything was proprietary. I mean, you couldn't get anything out of those guys or anybody for that matter. It was just so new. And so as early adopters, we got to figure it out, and I think for me particularly, you're really having to fall back on the science and really understand stress and adaptation and, get your head around, these are great now markers of actually what you've done and, how you look at volume, intensity, density, frequency, and actually know what you did in training. And I think, prior to that, it was all about planning, right? You can put it on paper. You can have a great idea of what you're trying to accomplish, from a biomotor standpoint, but how do you really know if you actually did it or not, And so having some of these external markers were great coming in, and we hung our hat on planning and did our best in execution, and now being able to collect and understand it, and then now to take it to where we are now to really just get better at how to use the data.
Yes. Yeah, no, I love that because I totally agree. There are a lot of places and people maybe overwhelmed with the data or not sure what to do with it. So actually applying it, whatever that data is key. So it sounds like you have that really nice triangle there of different influences and different staff and different backgrounds. So how did you guys, like you say, you're early adopters, you're innovators, you want to have more tools, and you've obviously gone out and found this an AI solution. How did you kind of assess Zone7 as providers and what they were offering? I asked that as the neutral party on this call, of course. Right. And then maybe we can throw across to Tal to expand on how he would respond to that from the provider standpoint. But yeah, talk me through that process from your standpoint.
Right. So I don't know. I probably add to the qualities of our staff as growth mindset. We're constantly evaluating ourselves and trying to find ways to be better at what we do. And again, for me, in an administrative setting, my role is to know the people I'm working with and provide them the resources that will help them to be better at doing their jobs. And so, we know here at Cal that we've got to be great at developing our athletes and great at physical preparation and great at physical development. It's a pillar for us. And so, early on, as we were exposed to maybe some of the newer technologies in and around AI, it was really about, exploring it to see if this would help us to create a more optimal environment for prepping our athletes, and also, obviously keeping them healthy and keeping them on the field. I mean, one, we have to be good at developing them, and two, we got to get the horses to the race, and they got to be able to perform. And so, for us, it was about seeking out, better and more efficient ways to do that. I think when Zach came in with us, he brought this whole new skill set, and it was kind of in tandem. We had already been up and going with Zone7, Tal and I, and we're already grinding away in the space. And Zach kind of came on, and he brought a new level of understanding and method to our approach, and especially on the technical and science levels. And so for us, it was, how can we create more efficiencies and then even some redundancies. And so I think that's where we initially jumped in with this and kind of where we are now.
Okay, and one more on that before I come to you, Tal. I just want to ask, in that time frame, in that where you were then, did you or any of your staff have like any of these, misconceptions or the kind of whether it's negative connotations or misconceptions about AI or what this tool was going to do or say?
Unconscious incompetent would be my level of understanding AI jumping into it. I did not understand it. I had no idea how it would work. And so for me personally, it was jumping in and trying to become educated. And of course, we've all heard about AI, but understanding it in our space and its potential was all new to me. So I kind of went into it not really understanding it, and then working obviously closely with Tal and EL, who were able to answer the tough questions, and get me up to speed with how that system functions and works. I think for me personally was really the key. But I will tell you that when Zach came in with his knowledge and background in sports science, man, he's asking questions that I don't even understand, to be perfectly honest with you. And I'll tell you, I've just been utterly impressed with EL and Tal and their ability to, one, be willing to have the conversation, and sit down and get the questions answered and work through the details of really creating credibility with each other in the system. And so that's been an ongoing process, and we've continued to grow, and those conversations they still happen, and it's a complex space, and so I appreciate that question, because it's certainly been part of our evolution to date.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's the same spot that many of the practitioners or people listening to this will be in. They'll be uncertain, there'll be things they won't know. So, Tal, with all that in mind, as the provider, what would you recommend, like the questions people should be asking and how they can go through that same process Mike just described in learning and upskilling themselves in this space?
Yeah, that's a great question. So thanks for the kind words, Mike. It's been a great journey. I think the mindset for us as a vendor is that we're here to support, if we can, expert operators, and that's the key thing. The key thing is for them to find efficiencies. Now, those efficiencies are sometimes around, oh, we can do this thing a little bit faster, or we could be a little bit more accurate, or eliminate some blind spots. That varies from environment to environment, but we always approach this with, an approach of how can this tool help the process that's ongoing? And so we basically try and create a process where, and also, sorry, before that, we recognize this is a complex space, and it's a space that, as a vendor, you have to prove yourself. You have to prove that this is legit, that this is accurate, that this is that there's real science behind it, or data science in our case. And so we have a process that has a couple of components in it to build that trust. So the first thing we typically do is to say, how do we know this works in this environment? How do we know this algorithm would perform well in this environment? So that's something to ask the vendor, right? Like, hey, can you show us how this would work? Can we do some sort of an open study or open analysis to build trust in this? And so we call this a retrospective analysis. You can think about it as a historical data audit. So we kind of create an algorithm for the client, and we process historical data, and we show them, hey, here's everything that we saw over the last 2 or 3 years in your data. And let's look at those cases one by one, and let's look at those cases in aggregate. And then we apply a statistical method to look at how accurate this is, right? How noisy is it? How accurate is it? And we can kind of talk about data science for a long time, but essentially it's about building trust in the science. But that's not enough, because around it, you have to create a situation where the vendor provides ways to interact with the technology that are useful. So that was a great example with Mike and his staff, where we continue to iterate over what's that experience like for a staff in Division I NCAA football. What do they need to see? It's clearly not the same as other sports we've been active in. It needs to be adapted to it, right? And it's not just meters and yards. It's much, much deeper. It's about positional groups, and it's about how you train them and how you practice and what happens in preseason and postseason and in season. So we went through this really interesting process where the content itself, not the mathematics, but the content had to be molded and reshaped. And there's no other way of doing that other than transparency and openness, and that's what the early adopter, using a tech terminology, that's what the early adopter relationship is like, right? you're kind of baking together, and you can't do that unless there's a good degree of trust. So thanks for the trust, Mike.
Yeah, I think that's, an interesting, you highlighted there a couple of things around, moving into the football or the American football space, right? And I'd love to get both of your thoughts on that, because Tal, as we've been working together on this sort of 6-piece series about AI in sports science. And one whole article was all about context in terms of periodization, in terms of positional demands, in terms of injuries, player profiles, everything. So, and it's something I experienced myself when going from soccer to hockey, ice hockey, then on to football, American football. And, I don't think there's a sport with a more diverse positional demands and athletic profile makeup than football. So maybe, Tal, do you want to go first in terms of like the data science process of converting what was predominantly, I believe, soccer-based system previously for the demands and the context of that sport?
Yeah, so when we first talked to Mike, I mean, we could showcase what we do in soccer, and we had a lot of it, but that was the basis of our initial conversation. And clearly the question was, would this work in football? And then we showed some early work about, we think this could be a good way to work in football. And so as a company moves forward in this field, then there's more and more quote unquote evidence to share. But initially it's really about building that together. So the process for us of going from one sport to another sport is very, very different to other tools in the sports tech ecosystem, right? Like a wearable kind of works very similar between soccer, football, hockey, basketball, etc. Minor changes, and some of the data tools like an AMS also. But to create an algorithm that understands the sport, the injuries, the cadence, the context of the periodization model, that's different. So for us, we had a couple adaptations. One of them is seasonality, right? We actually deploy a different configuration for the algorithm, preseason, in-season, and postseason. It's different rest periods, different intensities, different physical goals also, right? Yeah. Especially with students who are younger, and you do look at these periods of time as having a specific goal around building certain aspects of their fitness or physicality. Positional, of course, is also very different. Like soccer is more of a sport where squad is almost from a data perspective, a cohesive unit. In football, we have to break this down, right? You don't train the same guys the same way. They don't have the same injuries. The workload's different. You guys know that better. So aspect 1 is seasonality. Aspect 2 is positions. And aspect 3 is the advantage in football for a data science perspective is a relatively steady cadence. So when you're in season, right, when camp is over, then the week by week, game by game cadence is stable, and that's a benefit for us. Soccer is mostly stable. Sometimes you get 2 a week. Basketball, hockey, baseball are not stable or more chaotic and all over the place. So for us, it's about digitizing these contexts into an algorithm and using that digitization to create insights that Mike and his staff can then deploy. So it's about reflecting mathematically all these little things that can get baked into the model or influence the data science pipeline.
What that looked like for us was all the questions around that to get us in a place where there was clear understanding of what we do. And it started very broad from, off season, in season. What does that look like? What are our goals? How do we train? Are we training in position groups? Are we training individually? What does your weekly schedule look like within each of those phases of either preseason, off season, camp, or in season look like? And so we spent a tremendous amount of time just looking at that and identifying what we do and then how we do it, and right down to how we coach. And what I mean by that is, here's a technology that it really allows us to individualize, right, and understand the individual. At the same time, we don't coach individuals. We're coaching in groups, right? So how do we use individual data to modify or adjust within the context of a group training session? And so understanding that, how we look at our position norms or thresholds, and use that as part of our planning, in context with the individual information that we're gathering from the app. And so there's a lot to it. And the key was getting into the weeds, starting broad and then just peeling the onion one layer at a time until we could get to the point where they meaning EL and Tal, were able to ingest basically what the infrastructure is that we use. And so we spent a tremendous amount of time working on that, and I think we're still getting better at it. I mean, we've had conversations recently just about off season, and for us, this health and performance are a parallel in my space. I'm a S&C coach at heart, and I'm also a certified athletic trainer. I've worked in both space, and health and performance are a parallel. You can't have one without the other. And so for us to be able to really understand the off season and how to use this technology in the off season to better prepare our athletes, from a reverse engineering thought process of understanding what they do in season and in game, both globally right down to the individual needs, and then being able to prepare our athletes for those stresses. And the app's ability to ingest how we operate, what we do, is just allowing us to gather more data in a very efficient way and use it to help be better at creating that optimal environment for training.
Yeah, you described there about peeling back the layers of the onion, and there's an awful lot of layers in American football for sure. So I'm sure you've helped develop the product and the algorithms no end by providing all that context, because it's certainly key. On that kind of note, there's another topic, I guess, linked to that, is the fact of it being such a heavy contact sport. That was a bit different to some of the other team sports we face or we see. And Mike, I just wonder what your experience has been in terms of contact versus non-contact injuries, which is obviously debatable and complex. So I'm not expecting a straightforward answer here, but I just start diving into that a little bit.
Right. Well, it's funny. I mean, so the ability to forecast is always an interesting one. And Tal probably shakes his head every time I kind of get into this, because the forecasting itself is the outcome, that the injury itself is the outcome. And really I'm interested in mitigating risk. So whether you have an injury or not, did we understand what created the risk, and then how can we get better at being proactive so we don't have that, we can improve that, right? We can reduce the number of red flags or risks associated with the injury. And so understanding that association, I think, is critical. End game, be able to go back and run the self checks and look at the injuries and associate the risks that were there when they happened, I think is great. And an important self check that the system's doing what it should. But we know that when an athlete is fatigued, and we know what causes the fatigue, and we can identify what that looks like right down to a metric or multiple metrics. And what's interesting and what's amazing about Zone7 is it's taking the singular dimension of looking at a metric and maybe an acute to chronic workload ratio or an exponentially weighted moving average with a particular metric. And it's allowed us to look at multiple metrics, their influence on each other over time. So all of a sudden now we've got this 3-4 dimensional piece. And what we're really doing is identifying risk and trying to understand risk more effectively, and then how to prevent those, that moving forward. So mitigate it in the moment and then look to the future. How do we get better at it? And so I think, at the end of the day, it kind of take the injury question is really for us more of a proactive one of how we're looking at the information and using it.
Tal, do you want to jump in on that topic?
Yeah, I think Mike did a fantastic job of articulating like how the prism through which we see the world. It's not about predicting an injury and having a crystal ball that says, 15 minutes into this practice, this is going to happen because of this impact. It's impossible to do that. So that's why we kind of don't use the term predict. We use the term forecast. Things can happen randomly on the field, which nobody has control over. It's true for every sport, but it's more true in football because of the nature of the game. And so the goal is to help have an athlete walk on that field with some optimal type or level of workload preparation. So if we can do that, then over time we'll see a positive uplift in availability, but it's never going to be, if the forecast is 100% correct, we're not going to have 100% availability ever. That's not going to happen. But in football, like in other sports, yes, there is a random element to some injuries, but there is a chronic element to some other injuries. And so it's just about being able to contextualize that in the right way. So I think early days, the AI space collided with performance in a way that created some misconceptions, right? Predicting injuries is a term I used early days, and it's first off, it's the wrong term to use, which we corrected, but it also understandably creates a certain, I would say, resistance, and rightly so. So yeah, it's not about predicting; it's about forecasting. It's about preparation. It's not about load management in the sense of let's not have this guy on the field at all. It's about what are the micro changes to this day that might be more appropriate for this player.
Like you say, there is absolutely inherent risk in sport, full stop, and in football. So we're not, as much as we might want to strive for 100% availability all the time. I'm not sure that is ever going to be the case. But Tal, I wonder if you could kind of describe, we talked there about risk. What does Mike as the user see in terms of transparency, in terms of outputs in relation to, risk levels, what's driving the risk? And then on the back of that, Mike, I'd love for you to kind of explain a bit about how you then interpret and use that information. Okay.
So for us as a company that creates data science algorithms, the output is always some sort of numerical probabilistic estimation, right? From 0 to 1 in a way, likelihood of injury over the next X days. In the core mathematical sense, that's what we create, and then we have additional layers around that. But that would not collide well into the daily lives of a busy sports performance staff that need to look after 40 or 60 or more athletes. Like, they're not going to stare at numbers all day like a stock ticker. So what we've created is a layer of, we can call it visualization, we can call it experience, that translates those numbers into content that Mike and his staff hopefully can easily read. It's about creating easily read advice. I'll use the term advice very, very gently here. So the core layer is, what's the risk level? And we use categories like low, medium, high. We have a term called contained risk. So we translate that model into buckets, and we have names for those buckets, and it helps reading and moving forward. And sometimes you have a false positive, right? Like somebody was high, but actually it should have been a little bit lower. Or sometimes it's the other way around. So that's the nature of any probabilistic model. On top of that, we have contextual information about the injury, right? We think that this risk might lead to these events because we've analyzed a lot of football injuries, and this pattern is more likely to lead to a quad issue or hamstring issue. And then finally, we have some numbers around your typical game day -2 workload is X. Here are some options to look at interventions or changes to X, maybe a bit more on some parameters and a bit less. And that's the most extreme way of intervention. Many clients would do that as a last resort. Before they change anything on the field, they would do some conversations with the athlete, some light diagnostics, maybe some treatment, or even specific gym work. So that's the kind of content we create. It's designed to be read by humans. It's designed to be something that Mike spends a single digit number of minutes on and can understand the context. We're not a company that creates super duper complex dashboards where you have to kind of spend time unpacking that. We have those in the back end, but that's not the primary focus. The primary focus is human readable information that can lead to rapid action. And it's hard. It's hard to get that right because every sport is different, every staff is different, and and that's why we allow for certain calibrations. Like, we believe that we'd like to influence more heart rate related parameters. So, okay, we can do that change. Or we'd like to group certain parameters on impact this way and not the other way. But ultimately, it's about human readable info.
Is it readable by a human, Mike?
Is it readable by human? I hope so. So interesting. I'd say probably in the first 5 or 10 minutes of the conversation I had with Tal, I talked to him a little bit about what makes technology useful, and a couple things for us, and two real things. One, it's got to be able to take complex information and give us something that we couldn't get on our own, or give us something new or different that we couldn't gather otherwise. And so it's got to be able to take us to another level, right?
Yep.
And interesting that there are so many things out there. There's so many technologies out there that can do that, but can it do it in a non-intrusive way? And we said, how do we get something that makes us better? Okay. And yet it's simple, it's usable, it's efficient, and it makes it easier for us to do what we need to do from a day-to-day implementation of our work. And so, the key is simplicity. And you're taking a very complex environment, extremely complex, just from the standpoint of the data and the metrics and the analytics, but also just the training environment's complex. We've got 115 student athletes, 10 different position groups, 10 different position coaches, performance staff, sports. It's a complex environment. You've got kids that play a lot. You've got kids that don't play much, and being able to ingest, digest, and then be able to do something with this is critical. That we have a simple system that allows us, without an intrusive pathway to get there, to be able to, at a glance, get quality information that allows us to make decisions. And so, for us, at a glance, being able to open the app and look at the day report, and to immediately see, associated risk as, high, moderate, or low. And to have the ability to take a deeper dive if we want to, or just simply understand what's in front of us, have some basic recommendations, and then allow us to be able to move on to some other methods that we use to evaluate our athletes. And maybe we look at our wellness questionnaires or our force plate readiness assessments, and talk to the athletes and gather more information before we make decisions. But often, it's about triaging. And so for us, in that complex, daily environment, being able to, pop the app open, know it's reliable, get some information, give us a direction, and to be able to have actionable, recommendations it's just been fantastic for us. And again, we've got some redundancies built in place, and that's what the research tells us to do, is to not hang our hat on any one data point, and to use multiple methods to make decisions. And so we try to do that effectively. And but the simplicity of and efficiency of the system in the end, in that complex environment, has really been, I think, the most useful piece of this. And and at the end of the day, we're coaches, and we're in the business of doing everything from stretching to prepping to lifting to training to workload management, and there's just a lot, and to get great information in that efficient way it's been very helpful.
You mentioned about actionable recommendations there then. I think when in undertaking the series that I've been doing with Zone7, we asked the community, the industry, what concerns, what questions, what issues do they see in this space, and one of the again probably misconceptions is around this man versus machine piece, right? And so just dive into a little bit there in terms of, for you, I'm going to presume perhaps that you don't do exactly every action that is recommended. Like, how do you balance that with what your staff are seeing, what the players saying, what the wellness questionnaire is saying, for instance, all your other sources of information?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I think one, having some systems in place where you actually have the ability to kind of triage the information. So, particularly in season, we're getting readiness assessments on our athletes. They're filling out their wellness questionnaire. And obviously we're looking at their workload data, twofold. One, the recommendations through Zone7, and then Zach's running reports through his systems that are also providing great information on workload. And so, I think from an athletic performance staff standpoint, it's a matter of, looking at all that information and, having a basis to then figure out what's next. At that point, that's where Brian Johnson, our head of athletic performance for football, is incredible. And his ability to take that information and then go somewhere with it. He's interacting with potentially the athlete themselves, a position coach or a head coach, depending on what level of interactions necessary, and he may work directly with the player on adding modalities. And then of course assign staff to aid in that. He may be working directly with a position coach to modify some form of reps or sets within their position or group work. Or he may be going back to our head coach and having conversation globally about, increasing or decreasing practice time. And, probably as a side note, oftentimes I think in this space, folks get really hung up on the injury piece of it, that far side of the spectrum. Right. And I just want to add that, this has been great for us on, from a performance standpoint as well. And in parallel, I mean, I can't tell you how many times, Brian is running top offs in practice in season, because we need outputs to increase in the practice. And so it's not always about pulling back, it's about, again, Tal mentioned optimal. And, if we have our technologies in place and systems and processes in place that help us to understand how to better create that optimal environment, and then we have the people that can actually get in there and make it happen, then, and it's not perfect. It's not perfect. And I don't think it'll ever be perfect in football. And, but we're working hard at it. And at the end of the day, it all comes down to what's being done and the actionable items. So I think it's a great question.
Tal, I know you are very keen on that message as well around underloading and overloading from our conversations as well. So I thought you might want to add something there.
Yeah, I think for better or worse, I look at the world through the eyes of a data guy, and so my life's a bit easier if I can kind of bucket things into these very, very distinct groups. So, is there risk? Yes or no, right? Like falling sometimes into the pitfalls of oversimplifications. If there is risk, what parameters or what are the factors driving the risk, right? I mean, we're used to seeing in the data science world like this really big, forgot what it's called, a lot of horizontal bars and impact on a lot of factors, and you can see 100 factors, but you're not going to put 100 factors in front of Mike. Otherwise, you're not doing your job. So how do you pick the right, most impactful 3 or 4? And then, like, if D cells or ACT cells are a risk factor, why is that? Is it because they are? And then you look for a simplistic answer, like, oh, there's overload, and then the remedy or the outcome might be, let's look at cutting back a bit of the workload, or maybe the answer is underloading, in which case you might want to increase a little bit. So those are good directions to try and follow. And sometimes reality conforms and you're seeing a very clear pattern, and sometimes reality is more complex. So that's where, as a tool, you have to be consistent and transparent what you are and what you're not. This is not the magic root cause analysis that drives everything to do with performance and injuries. It's not causality. It is a highly sophisticated data science engine. The outcomes are validated, but essentially, at the end of the day, practitioners need to look at a couple of different things and decide. So we try and make that easy by having these little nuggets of information available. But sometimes it's not a clear-cut case of over or under. Sometimes it's a combination of both, or even a decision that AI would never understand, because there's a guy in the field and there's a bunch of human experts around him, and they need to get together and have a conversation and make a decision. And so we're kind of conscious of keeping the right boundaries to the tool, right? Like I say a lot of times, it's a bit of a cliche, but this is not autopilot. This is a great radar at the hands of a human pilot. And, sometimes a human will turn off the radar just because it's storming and they need to do a more of an analog human-driven process. And sometimes they can rely more on the radar. So that's kind of the way we look at it. So it's about empowering the expert. And there would be times where that's very easy to ingest, and sometimes where, the human subjective process will be more dominant.
With our series, and, the final piece, the 6th piece, was around that application. And we talked at length about the hybrid approach, right? It's neither just man and gut instinct, nor is it purely machine autopilot, as you said, Tal. It is always a hybrid approach, blending both human and tech. And I think that whole series, if people are interested, is available in an ebook, which I'm sure we can link to. But Mike, then thinking forward now, is there anything you wish the platform could do, or that you're hoping for next, or that you're excited about from conversations you're already having, that isn't too private, of course?
Of course. No, the microcycle planner is a component to the Zone7 that we're very excited to see continue to develop. And again, I don't know, maybe it goes back to my early days when when everything was proprietary and we had to make sense out of all the metrics and figure it all out for ourselves. But when we did that, it was kind of a simple thought process, right? We looked at the simple physical demands of the sport in season, and we reverse engineered it. And we said, okay, how do we prepare progressively, in the right, with the right periodization and undulation and with incremental progress over time to get to a point where we can develop high chronic workloads that are recoverable for the athlete. So when they're in season, those stresses are manageable. And so the microcycle planner is a component to the Zone7 that I think is going to allow us to take that thought process to a much more technical and usable level. And so I'm excited to see that continue to develop. And we'll, Tal, it's on you. You got to figure that out for us.
Thanks. I mean, for my end, Joe, I'm really excited about seeing the platform deploy postseason and outside of a game-to-game environment. And the bar we're trying to hit every week is maybe more about development over, optimizing for performance versus risk for a game-by-game basis. So that's a really exciting area for us right now in the American, which is kind of unique for American football, spring ball and all that.
And what about in terms of like connecting with other departments? I mean, Mike, it sounds like you guys already have great connections with the coaching staff, but I'm thinking, recruitment, scouting, maybe, I don't know if that's more on the pro level, but is there any development there in that space that you see it being integrated with other staff or departments?
It's an interesting space because I think with HIPAA and FERPA and data security and privileged information around this space, at least at the collegiate level, I think it's a little bit challenging to put it out there publicly at this point. What will drive that is media, and so when the media starts throwing technologies on the on the screen in the NCAA space where you're seeing simple velocities and decelerations and so forth on the screen. I think that data becomes more public and that may loosen up a little bit. But I think there's still a fair amount of regulation in and around this data, who gets access to it and how it's used. At least through the NCAA and through regulation now. However, it is fantastic for us in regards to recruiting, and we spend a lot of time, getting in front of our student athletes before they get here and have an opportunity to share with them our operations, our staffing, our systems and processes, and Zone 7 is a big part of the recruiting process for us, as well as our other methods that we're using with tech. And so yeah, there's certainly interest, and folks are and parents and athletes are always I think excited to see the things that we're doing to help prepare them more efficiently, more effectively, and then also really, especially with the parents, keeping them healthy. So this is it's been great on the recruitment standpoint.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, because you guys, from what you've described today, clearly are innovators in this space with your early adoption of tech. So it must be exciting to go along for the ride with this process.
It's exciting for us. I mean, when we first started talking about this, and Tal and I, had our initial conversations, they had already been working with several teams in the NFL, and so I said, well, would you be interested in the collegiate space? And kind of links back into your last question a little bit too, is just and Tal's answer in off season, right? And the one big thing that's kind of unique in this space is in the collegiate space is that we train year round and we're collecting data year round, maybe a little bit different than in an NFL setting. And so, for us to really be able to use this and really get better at using it to help our preparation in the off season is exciting stuff. But yeah, for us being able to tell the parents and tell our student athletes, hey, look, we're one of the first folks in the collegiate space to use AI in this space, and we're excited to be able to bring it to our athletes. It's been great.
So then, Tal, from your perspective, how are you guys trying to get better and develop in this space?
That's a good question, Joe. I think for this kind of product, like some technologies, you can go and kind of work in the lab for a year or 2 years and 3 years and come up with something great. This requires mileage with the client, with new data sets, with new decisions, with new needs. So we're continuing to do that. And during that process, we continually improve with both the accuracy and the usability. Right, things that we did for Berkeley this year was, hey, let's export the Zone 7 quote unquote load management recommendations so they can get plugged into the GPS provider to have live alerts. So those are more usability, and of course we have more data development and algorithms as we move forward, like injury risk type forecasting and things like that. But also things get better naturally because more clients join, the data size, the data lake becomes bigger, and so there's a natural self-learning process here. So season 2 with a client is always a little bit better in terms of the machine learning being able to understand historically what this environment likes to do. And in parallel, there's just more football data available for us to analyze because of the the expansion with more teams. So that's our playbook on how to over time get better at any of the sports we were active in.
Yeah, and I think, that's the journey of any kind of tech, isn't it? Is you think back to, well, Mike, you mentioned over 10 years ago now, early versions of GPS tracking, which I'm sure were less hertz, probably only outdoor solutions, and see how that technology has evolved. So it's the same path that we're on. And it sounds like you guys, within the space of a year, have made vast developments in terms of adopting or adjusting this tech to the context of this sport. And again, with collaboration, then the technology and also the application of it is going to just keep getting better. And hopefully we're going to keep serving our athletes better, like you said, Mike, in terms of athlete development and athlete performance.
No doubt about it. And, for us, just having that growth mindset and being able to try to find ways for us to just be more efficient, get better at what we're currently doing, gather more usable information in the process, and ultimately, help create that optimal training environment. But we're looking forward to year 2 with Zone7, and really, we've dove heavily into the off-season prep, and again, we're already giving new information to Zone7 because our training off-season is a little bit different than this year than last year, and they're already ingesting it, and it'll all be used as we continue moving through the off-season. So, looking forward to year 2 here with this with the system.
I think those, people watching or listening who have a growth mindset and interested learning more, certainly I would, but in a very biased way, recommend getting the ebook online that we collaborated on. But other than that, Tal, where should people look for more information if they want to learn about AI or Zone7 in particular?
We've just launched a new website with a bunch of case studies and what we call the Performance Hub, where folks from the community engage with us. Sometimes it's around the product, sometimes it's around other topics of interest in data science. So that's a great resource. And of course, everybody's welcome to email me directly. Pretty easy, tal@zone7.ai.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both for sharing your insights. It's great to have both, a provider and a user share some honest feedback about their perspectives and their use cases. So thank you both.
Thank you, Joe. Everybody. Thanks a lot, Tal. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Joe.
If you want to hear more from Zone7 and our Performance Hub, you can follow us at the website zone7.ai, or follow us wherever you listen to your podcasts. There'll be an episode every month, and you can find out more information by following our Twitter account and also on LinkedIn. Thanks.